Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to have been invited, and I greatly appreciate the invitation from you. And also really appreciate, it looks like there's about 100 people joining us, all of you who have taken the time out of your day to join me here. I have provided my email here on this slide, rebeccaeaubrey@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me anytime with any questions you have. I love to connect with and collaborate with other language teachers, and so I would be happy to connect with you. I also do have my Twitter handle shared there, and I would encourage you to tweet out anything interesting that you hear today, because it helps me then to, because I can't follow the whole chat box, it helps me to see what people find interesting or helpful in what I share. So, my life typically kind of starts like this, where I wake up and very slowly and reluctantly drink my cup of coffee. And then I like to try to go for a run every day. One of the things I appreciate about distance learning right now is that I don't have to be at school by 7:30 and I don't have to leave the house by 7. So I am actually able to get up and get a run in at a reasonable hour. And then I come back and I'm like so energized and I'm so ready to start my day and get to my classes and to my students. And that's, when you sit down and get to work, but then because we're home, there's all this other home stuff, that starts to mix in. And typically, I'm the sort of teacher who brings a lot of work home with me. But right now, those lines between what is home and what is work are completely blurred. So it's not long before I'm usually, crying most days. And then, you break out the bottle of wine, and then soon you're just kind of passed out. And I have to say that, when I was invited to do this webinar, it was a couple weeks ago, and I was very excited about it. But I'm realizing that I've come to be in a different place right now. And I started to wonder, what on earth was I thinking when I said I could come and present to a bunch of language teachers in Indiana about how to stay sane during distance learning, when I'm not staying sane? I'm going completely bonkers. And I really, had a lot of great ideas prepared for this webinar, a lot of thoughts I wanted to put out, but at some point yesterday, I had a little bit of a breakdown thinking, I'm not staying sane. I'm not holding myself together. What am I thinking? And I called up a friend of mine in Colorado, who some of you may know, Leanne Tirada, who is the outgoing president of the Colorado Foreign Language Teacher Association. And I was just like, I don't know why I said I would do this. I'm not holding it together. I'm not sane. I'm losing my mind. I'm tired of being stuck at home. I don't know what to do with my students anymore. And she just told me to stop and breathe. And the conversation with her really helped me to regroup and realize that part of this conversation is that we're all kind of struggling on that edge of holding ourselves together and continuing to do the best we can for our students. And so what was most powerful to me about my conversation with her was this word of empathy, because she showed me a great deal of empathy in terms of what I was feeling, but also reminded me that I needed to be empathetic with myself. And that word empathy is really at the heart of what I want to talk about with you today, in terms of how we are working with our students, with our colleagues, how we're being empathetic towards our program goals, but also how we can be empathetic with ourselves. And before I forget, I meant to ask this right at the beginning, but as I continue to blabber over the next minute, if you could please take out a piece of paper and something to write with, because you are going to need it in a minute. The other thing that my friend Leanne reminded me about was that as the National Teacher of the Year, I had a very busy year, and I continue to be very busy. I also took on a new job this year in a new district, and I am a single parent to 3 kids, one graduating college, one just starting college, and one in high school. And my own self-care often falls by the wayside. And so something I started to do a couple months ago was on my phone, set some reminders for myself or some goals. And so you see here, I have the professional, home, TEMS, which is the acronym for my middle school, and then for me. And I started each day setting 2 goals for things that I wanted to accomplish in the day, 2 professional items, whether it be to submit a conference proposal, to respond to an email, 2 things I had to get done at home, whether that be throwing out the rotting food in the refrigerator, remembering to take the garbage out, 2 things I wanted to get done for school, and also 2 things I wanted to get done each day for me. And I made them each very small, specific, tangible goals so that I wasn't feeling so overwhelmed with so many different competing demands on my time. And so when I talked to Leanne, she reminded me about that. And so we're going to do something a little similar to that today. So on that piece of paper I asked you to take out, I'd like you to write on the top some ideas to try and ideas to share. And when I say ideas, these it's loosely ideas. So these might be some different philosophies or perspectives or some really tangible ideas. And then down on the left side of the page, we're going to talk about 3 different topics: instructional practices, connecting with students, and self-care. And so I'm going to just keep this up for a minute. I'm not going to sing you a song while you write because I have a horrible voice. If anyone else wants to sing on the panel, go for it. But I just like to give you a few more seconds to write this down because we're going to be using it throughout the course of the webinar. So I'll just give about 10 more seconds. The most important would be the ideas to try and ideas to share, and then start with instructional practices. That'll be the first topic we'll get to. And if I'm gonna move on, but if you haven't had a chance to write it all down, I will be showing this a few times throughout the presentation. So our goals for today are, I have 3 different objectives that align with those categories. If I was doing a live presentation, I would ask you to turn and read this to the person sitting next to you. So since we're all going a little bonkers at this point, I'll just encourage you to turn and quietly read it to the wall next to you, your chair, the dog at your feet, the toilet paper roll that you have stashed in your desk, whatever you might have. But if you could just take a minute to read those out loud. I can't hear any of you. All right.
Everybody should be muted, so.
I know, it was a joke. It was a joke. I knew everyone was muted. Okay. So first thing that I wanted to talk about are some instructional practices to try to stay sane. And I think really what's at the heart of this are what are some of the different ways that we can make things manageable for your students and for you, thinking about the well-being both of us, but also of our students. There's, I know when we first kind of began to engage with distance learning, there was a lot of discussion around how much we had to modify curriculum, to what extent curriculum would be modified. And I know different districts have different circumstances and different expectations, but my guess would be at this point, most people understand that our curriculums need to be modified in some way. And so when I look at how we're going to prioritize those modifications, I think number one, we have to make sure that we're continuing to engage students. And this is particularly challenging under these times, particularly as the distance learning has become more prolonged. Finding ways to continue to hook students in is very challenging. Secondly, a major priority is ensuring that we're continuing to engage in practices that are pushing students' language proficiency growth from wherever they are towards what our goals are. And those long-term outcomes that we were hoping for the year may have to be changed, but whatever they are, we want to make sure we're continuing to push students' proficiency growth. Thirdly, it's very important that we are being very selective and very purposeful with the things that we ask students to do. And so this again needs to be focused on pushing proficiency growth. So it really means thinking very carefully about what kinds of activities we're asking our students to be doing. Fourthly, I'm finding personally for me, providing appropriate scaffolding is very challenging since we no longer have the face-to-face interaction with our students. But because we're asking them to do so much more work independently without those interactions, it's very important that we're providing appropriate scaffolding for our students. I didn't say this at the beginning, but most of my background has been working with elementary students and into the middle school grades. I do have a lot of experience teaching at the college level, but it was more in Latin American studies. But across the board, I've found that the more predictable we can be and the more structured we can be, the more successful students will feel. So I think it's important that we maintain that level of predictability. Finally, we need to make sure that we're designing activities that are manageable. And by manageable, I mean manageable for us to design, manageable for us to evaluate and provide feedback, but also manageable for students to complete. I remember reading a tweet when this all started about how when you design an activity for students, you should then try to do the activity and see how long it takes you. And if it takes you 10 minutes, you have to multiply that, I believe, by 4, because that's how much longer it'll take students to do it. And so this really means paring down what we would normally ask our students to be doing. So for me, what does that look like? What I am really prioritizing are listening and speaking activities. And the kind of go-to technologies that I like to use primarily right now are Pear Deck and Screencastify, along with Edpuzzle. I don't know how many people are Pear Deck users out there, but Pear Deck also just added in a voice recording. So you can completely, you don't even need to use the Screencastify anymore, depending on what you're looking for, but you can embed your own audio files right into the Pear Deck. So Pear Deck, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is an add-on you can get for Google Slides that enables students to interact with it. And so I can present information, I can present videos, and then prompt students to respond in a drawing, prompt them to respond with multiple choice questions or with an open-ended question. And this is where you can provide some really great scaffolding, because I can ask a question and provide students with multiple choice options to kind of guide them towards what the question might be asking them. And then the next question might be more open-ended, where I put some more independence on them. I am then also a really big fan of Seesaw. Seesaw, I think, has traditionally primarily been targeted towards elementary audiences, but I am making a big sell on it with both my middle school and my high school colleagues. Seesaw enables you to do a variety of input for students, but then ask them to provide some output back in terms of speaking. I know a lot of people like to use Flipgrid as well for these sorts of activities. The reason I prefer Seesaw is because students develop a portfolio, and so I can assign a long series of activities, but it all gets saved into a student's portfolio. You can write comments on it. Parents can see the work that students are doing, but enables you to track students' progress over time in their portfolios. And maybe I'll just take a quick pause there and see if there are any questions about anything I've shared so far.
I see we have one question in the chat, if you would potentially be willing to share the presentation slides later, so they can kind of focus more on the content, not so much on taking notes.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will move on. The other thing I wanted to address is Google Translate. because I'm hearing even more teachers now express concerns about students translating their work, or, you know, whether it's Google Translate or anything else. And I wanted to, just talk a little bit about some strategies that'll help keep us sane and help avoid using Google Translate or going down that rabbit hole. So first and foremost, I feel that it's really important to establish a culture of risk-taking. And that means that we need to embrace errors that students make in an attempt to communicate, as opposed to necessarily focusing on precision. And this, of course, would be depending on the level of students that you're working with. But according to ACTFL proficiency standards, novice level learners, intermediate learners, and even kind of getting into the advanced range still makes a lot of mistakes. As you get into the intermediate range, you begin to ask questions about how much the mistakes get in the way of understanding. But the bottom line is they're going to make mistakes. And if we can kind of try to back off from really nitpicking mistakes students will make, they're going to be more likely to want to, try things and to engage in some risk taking, which then I think dissuades them from using Google Translate. Secondly, you've got to invoke your inner Goldilocks. And what do I mean by that? We think about Goldilocks, how, she tried one chair and it was too little. She tried another chair and it was too big. And then she tried the middle chair and it was just right. This is that zone of proximal development that students have when we want to try to push their growth. We want to try to present them with tasks that are not too challenging and not too easy, but just the right appropriate level of challenge to help them grow. I feel that under distance learning, that bar of that zone of proximal development, or that Goldilocks standards, needs to be just a little bit easier than what we would normally do. But when we ask students to do something they're not ready to do yet, they're going to revert to Google Translate. Thirdly, we need to make sure that we're providing students with a lot of modeling through comprehensible input. We need to model what we're hoping to get them to be able to start to say and do independently. I also feel that dictionaries do have an appropriate place for different things. In my district, we allow students to only use word reference, and I do empower my students to use them appropriately. So one example might be, right now we are learning about clothing, and we kind of have a common set of clothing items that we're talking about. But I had a student who really is into hockey and wanted to talk about her hockey uniform, and those weren't words that we were using. So that's a case where I would tell students it's okay to go up and look up an additional word or two that you don't have in your repertoire. We're just not doing it with sentences. And so what I ask students to do on different assignments is just remind them of our policy that we don't look up sentences in Google Translate. If there's a word or two that you feel like we haven't been talking about in our class that you want to use, look it up in word reference, but write me a private comment and let me know what words you looked up. And so that then just holds them accountable to use their integrity to acknowledge what words they did look up. And I find that my students are really, with each of these different pieces coming together, they are very respectful of not translating. And finally, I always try to respond with compassion. This is something that I learned from a colleague of mine who was talking about when students are late to class. Instead of reprimanding them, she would ask them if they were okay and if something was going on. And so when it's clear to me every once in a while that I get a student who has translated something, I typically acknowledge that I know it didn't come from the content that we were working with, and just say, it looks like you were struggling a little bit with completing this activity. Next time, instead of using Google Translate, could you please just write me a message and I'd be happy to help you out. And so I just kind of acknowledge it, but don't engage in the debate about it. The other piece that's been very important to me, and I think very kind of mind-blowing during this period, is how much my colleagues and I have come together, and the sort of collaboration that we're doing. And I'm going to try to play a brief video for you to show you, and I hope the technology works. But my colleagues and I on my 7th grade Spanish team decided to begin to collaborate together to make instructional videos for our students so that we weren't, number one, each recreating the wheel. Like, why have each of us separately creating our own work? Why not do it together and then we can all use it? But secondly, we realized that it was a great way for students to get a diversity of modeling, because instead now of just hearing me speak with my accent and the words that I use, my voice, they're hearing other voices talking all around the same topic. And so we're actually collaborating to create a sort of telenovela series. It's not quite as dramatic as a telenovela, but in which we're planning to take a trip together, and we've filmed it separately to make it look like we're having a phone conversation. And so I'm going to try to play a clip for you. For the people who don't speak Spanish, I did put in some subtitles, and I apologize that they go very fast. And that didn't work. Okay. Let's try that one more time, and if not, oh, there we go.
Me gustaría mucho tomar unas vacaciones cuando termine la cuarentena. Me gustaría mucho tomar un viaje a Punta Arenas, Chile, porque es muy bonito y hay paisajes muy interesantes como montañas y lagos, glaciares. Ay, no, profe, hace mucho frío en Punta Arenas, Chile. A mí me gustaría ir a España, porque me encanta la comida y quiero ver la famosa arquitectura. Me gustaría ir a España, pero yo prefiero ir al bosque tropical en Costa Rica, porque me encantan los animales. Buena idea. Me gustaría mucho visitar a Costa Rica. Perfecto. Voy a mirar mi ropa y necesito hacer unas compras también. Hasta pronto.
So I forgot to preface this with the fact that what I just showed you was a clip from our second video that we created, in which we did a little recap of what happened in the first one. But I thought that was the best way to give you just an idea of what we were doing. So what does this look like overall? And this is probably a lot of text to go through quickly, but just when I talk about making things manageable and layering on information, you see that we have our classes and assignments 2 days a week. So we started off by reviewing weather with some games. The teacher would then model, what I'm wearing according to the weather and ask students to draw it in a pear deck. The second day, we followed that up with an activity where teachers modeled with a video in Seesaw talking about what we were wearing, and we asked students to then talk about it. So we've kind of progressed through over a couple of weeks where we're adding in more and more language structures and more vocabulary and building on what they've done in the previous classes. But it's consistently formatted and just very predictable, in which they have a pear deck in which they're practicing some vocabulary and being exposed to vocabulary in context through the videos that we're creating for them. And then the second activity is always a speaking activity in which we model some speaking and they then respond using that modeling that we've provided them with. And so we're doing a lot of collaboration with these videos. We've done 2 so far. And with Seesaw, teachers can produce a sample video. We're also collaborating to create the sample videos in Seesaw so that we can each then assign the same assignment to students. And again, they're getting modeling from a variety of teachers. We're having a lot of fun brainstorming the videos as we were talking about what to pack and stuff. We noticed that one of the teachers generally carries a great deal of items with her when she goes some places. I am a very low-key traveler. My goal is to always only have a carry-on suitcase, even if I'm going for 2 weeks. And so we're planning to do a video in which we're comparing our suitcase sizes and what we have in them. And so we're just kind of really having a lot of fun with them, and the students are really enjoying them. Those of you who have ever met me know that I'm a hugger. I love, 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 love big hugs. This is me and a colleague, Lisa. We met up in New York City back in February. One of the things that I'm missing most now is not being able to have those in-person interactions, and I greatly, greatly miss hugs. Teenage kids don't like hugs. I really miss hugs. We need to make sure that we're finding other ways to continue to collaborate with our colleagues. For me, that's a lot of Zoom meetings, just like what we're doing now. And so it's so great that you guys are here and you're doing this. But also even just engaging with other language teachers through social media like Twitter. It's a great place to go and learn things, to get ideas from other teachers, see what other teachers are doing, find things that might work in your classroom. But something that's really, really important about this is don't compare yourself to others. And this is a really important point. It's so important. I want you to turn and read this aloud again to the toilet paper or the wall or whoever you talked to last time. Yell it, in fact. Don't compare yourself to others. It is so important because if you go on Twitter, you'll see that there are some people who don't sleep. They spend their whole day creating amazing, amazing activities and then all night posting them on social media. And I'm in awe of the stuff that they do, but not everyone can do that. And so don't compare yourself to others. You know, go on social media, get ideas, but then put it away because everybody's circumstances is different. We can't all be doing everything all the time. So I wanted to come back to this chart that you had. And here's, I'm going to ask the moderators to help chime in. But I was wondering if people could write in the chat no more than 2 ideas that you might like to try that I've talked about here, but then also a couple of ideas that you would like to share with everybody else. And I'm not quite sure how this is going to be managed in this format, but I would love it if the moderators might be able to share out a couple of things that come across in the chat.
So right off the bat, we have Deb Blau sharing that she really likes the Goldilocks reminder.
Thanks, Deb.
We've got several teachers who are really intrigued to learn more about Pear Deck and Seesaw. Someone really appreciated strategies on how to handle Google Translate, since a lot of folks are dealing with that.
Yeah, so Pear Deck and Seesaw, that's probably a whole nother webinar, but I did share my email. It's rebeccaeaubrey@gmail.com. I'd be happy to chat with anybody more who wants to learn more about how I use those. Did anybody have any ideas, something maybe I didn't mention that they want to share out or important? It's not even necessarily specific technologies, but mindsets or practices or philosophies.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, someone was talking about, creating predictable structures for students, with so many different things going on with the pandemic, that's really important to give students that structure. Let's see, somebody noted for Pear Deck that they actually offer a webinar to kind of get a 101 crash course on how to use that extension. So for other colleagues, someone really likes the idea of using Bitmoji more in their teaching to, again, kind of, build that personal relationship. The importance of, focusing on the essentials during this time. Let's see, we have a question about, for large classes, how do you, are there any platforms you recommend for kind of encouraging them to speak when you're working with large classes of students?
So I'm not sure what counts, what large necessarily refers to. I have approximately 120 students in total, and I do seesaws every week, and I provide them with some detailed proficiency feedback about every other week. And so those are, I provide them always with a glow and a grow. This is something I was inspired to do by Rebecca Blowolf, our current Teacher of the Year. And that does take a fair amount of time. And I don't know if that helps to answer the question, but to respond to a couple of the other things that you mentioned, Seesaw and Pear Deck are two technologies that I've been trying to sell to my department all year. And one of my colleagues has been saying all year that she doesn't have the time to do it. She doesn't have the time to do it. She doesn't have the time to do it. And when we began engaging in distance learning, she kind of quietly came up to me and said, can you teach me how to do these? And she was completely blown away with how easy they were to do, just completely blown away. The other thing I wanted to mention about Bitmojis is that I also invite my students to share their Bitmojis with me. And this is something I've done all year, but they share different Bitmojis with me. And I then periodically throughout the year pop them into different presentations that we were doing. So when we were talking about traveling around, like we had a really boring topical unit on the school, and I hid students' Bitmojis in the school, and they had to like under the desk eating an ice cream or something. And so they had to talk about where different students, like where's Jennifer, you know, where's Israel? And they had to find the Bitmoji. And so that's another fun way to bring them in and engage students. Okay, in the interest of time, I'll keep going.
Rebecca, just one before,
yes.
Sorry for the interruption. If you have a question, you can send a private a message to Teresa, Charmaine, or myself, and we can unmute you, or you can use the raise hand icon as well, and we can unmute your profile. Sorry for the interruption, Rebecca.
That's okay. The next piece that I wanted to talk about is finding different ways to connect with students, again, to try to stay sane. How can we continue to maintain relationships with our students? And I am constantly blown away with the things that I'm hearing other teachers do to make sure that we're continuing to remain connected with our students. I want to ask you a question, and that is, why did you decide to become a teacher? Again, talk to the toilet paper roll, tell the story to someone next to you. Why did you decide to become a teacher? I'm going to tell you right now, for me, it was not for this. It was not to see an empty classroom. Total side story, I'll tell you another day, like over a cup of coffee or something, or a glass of wine, but I never thought I would become a teacher. I really ended up becoming a language teacher because I love exploring diverse cultures, and I love the way that a language is a tool for that, and the way it's empowered and enriched my life. And I really wanted to share that. I also really love young people, and I love working with them. I get an enormous amount of satisfaction by interacting with my students. And so losing that now has been a big loss to me. And it's partly why I am not staying as sane as I would like to. So how then are we finding different ways to engage with our students? And I have a problem, I'm sorry, here with my screen with my email popping up and I can't get it to close. Sorry, 1 second. So I'm really sorry, I can't get this to close right now. But so one thing is that I do have some students who, one thing I really like about being at school isn't just standing in front of a class or managing a class or those activities, but the kids who stop into my room on their way to the homeroom every morning, or the kids who ask if they can come and eat lunch in my classroom at lunchtime. I have a student who, we got to a point in the school year, my classroom's on the 2nd floor, the big bay window that overlooks where the buses unload. And I have a student who started waving to me from the window as she was approaching the school. So I had to be at the window every day to wave to her. And then she's rallied a whole group of her friends who also do it. So I have to be there when the buses unload and wave to them all, and they get all excited. And I miss that. And that student has started to send me emails that kind of recreate that connection or that atmosphere. And so this is, I don't know if you can read it, it's very small font, but she talks about, you know, how much she misses me and shares some tea with me, which that's the part that I blacked out. So she taught me that word. So for you people who are older than a certain age, tea doesn't mean a drink. It means the gossip at school. And so she's always sharing her tea with me, and that I blacked out to respect her privacy. But she sends me knock jokes. She shares some tea with me, and just kind of like, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I miss you, and I'm going to send you emails every now and then, which is what she does. I had another student just a couple weeks ago who sent me an email because it was going to be her birthday, and she asked if I would schedule a Google Meet on a day that was not a class time because she wanted people to sing happy birthday to her, and she wanted to play Spanish games. And so what we ended up doing was scheduling an extra, you know, class is basically what it was. But we just played some games, and I invited in all 120 of my students. I think I had 15 show up. But it was on a Friday afternoon, and they all just came. They sang happy birthday to her. They sang happy birthday to a couple of other kids who had a birthday. So really kind of finding new ways to tap into those extra connections that we have with students has really helped to maintain some resemblance of my sanity. Some other, you know, of my go-to strategies are continuing to make positive phone calls home or to send positive emails. I sent an email just yesterday to the parents of I sent it to the student and CC'd his parents. He all year has struggled with work completion and work ethic, and suddenly right now he's doing pretty well in most of his classes. He's actually missing a lot of math assignments, but had everything else turned in. And I sent him an email and just congratulated him on the hard work that he was doing. And the mother was so pleased and so surprised to receive that. And I know that's only then helping to positively reinforce it for him. I do a lot of individual check-ins with emails in Google Classroom, writing private comments to students. But a really big piece for me has been to prioritize feedback over grading. I know different districts have different policies. In my district, we are currently not giving students any grades at all. We're simply providing them with feedback. And I have to tell you that that is so rejuvenating for me. I am not a big advocate of traditional grades because I feel like they pretty much just reward compliance as opposed to encouraging students to grow and to reflect. And so I find that really giving students lots of good positive feedback to promote their growth, and then some strategies for how they can continue to grow, is really helping to maintain those positive relationships. I think it's also important to be empathetic and to choose your battles. And so this is understanding that these are very trying times for our students. We don't know what kind of circumstances they're living in or how their emotional well-being is. And so really being empathetic to that and choosing your battles. You know, maybe they're not going to turn every single assignment in or come to every single class. And I think we just need to be careful about choosing our battles in what we really insist that students do. I do, the other piece that I find is just really special are the Google Meets that I have with my students. We, in my district, are not allowed to require them. They are trying to increase participation and kind of more heavily persuade students, shall we say, to participate in them. But most of my Google Meets are games and checking in with students. How are you doing? One of the favorite games my students like to play is GimKit, which is kind of a low cognitive level, but I like to do the Kit Collab feature on GimKit. I don't know if people have ever tried that, but students can write their own questions, and I have them do circumlocution questions. So if we were doing fruits and vegetables, maybe I would ask, they might suggest a question that says, a fruit that is round and red, and then list as possible options, a banana, an apple, you know, a carrot, and a bottle of water, whatever. But it's helping them to develop that very essential, important circumlocution skill. And they then love to play GimKit. I also like to play Quizlet live games in my classes, and I do still put students on teams, and I ask them to unmute themselves and shout out the answers. And it is chaotic and crazy, but it's a lot of fun. They get very excited and they're all shouting out stuff in Spanish. So those are some of the things that I just think really help to the kids to feel that they're continuing to be engaged in class. One of the other things I do, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with Pear Deck, this is what it looks like to look at student responses on the teacher end. But I always, in every assignment I ask students to do, I ask them at the end of the assignment how they found the assignment. What did you think of this assignment? And I give them options, and it was very easy, more or less easy, a little bit hard, or really hard. And that's great feedback for me to know where students might have struggled with different pieces of it and how I might need to modify assignments moving forward. But I also will typically reach out to the students who told me they found it to be really hard. And because if I were to click on the muy difícil, the green, I would see the names of the students who said it was really hard, or the student. And I would write that student a private message and just say, I'm really sorry that you found this to be hard. That was really great feedback for me. Next time, please feel free to write me a private comment and I'll help you out. But this is just kind of one of the ways that I like students to feel that their voice is important to me, but also that I care about how the work is for them and finding appropriate ways to respond to it. All right, so I'm going to take another pause here and give you a chance to write down a couple ideas that you'd like to try, or some ideas that you might like to share out.
Once again, just let us know with the raise hand icon, or just send us a message and we can unmute if you want to participate.
I can't see the chat, but I could see that there were a lot of comments happening. And so I don't know if there's some interesting things there that the moderators would like to share about either ideas people saw that they would like to try, or some ideas of their own that they would like to share with the rest of us.
So we had a share from Amanda Beck that she's been leaving feedback in Canvas, which students have really responded to, especially when she leaves video feedback for them. Timothy shared that she loves the idea of using GIM Collab for learning circumlocution. And then we had kind of two broader questions that people were discussing. So, how do we deal with students with special needs during this pandemic? And how do you kind of try to collaborate with other teachers when you're trying to do synchronous learning? Because it seems like teachers are scheduling things at lots of different times during the day, and especially for high school students. If they don't have to wake up as early, they are typically not waking up as early.
Yes. So in terms of kids waking up early, my district, I'm in a middle school, and we are facing that problem where we have students' sleep schedules are becoming are changing enormously. So we have a lot of students who aren't getting up until noon or 1 or so. And that is definitely a problem. My district, in terms of scheduling, has given us a really clear schedule where we can't require students to meet with us, but if I choose to meet with my students, I can only do it when my class is scheduled for it. And so that does avoid any sort of conflicts in schedule. I would say that a good strategy would be to try to have recorded videos that you can then share that students can watch at any time. I think particularly for high school students, that would probably be a more effective strategy to address that problem of students sleeping in. But I think the question about differentiating for diverse learners is a very important one. And it's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I've spoken a lot about this topic over the last couple of years. For me, fundamentally, a lot of it comes down to being very thoughtful, again, in the types of activities that we're asking students to do. So I try to provide students with a lot of scaffolding and resources, but they're really performing at different levels. And I have always encouraged them to know that that's okay. And so when I talk about different levels, some students are only able to produce lists. Some students are only able to kind of piece some phrases together. Some students are doing some sophisticated sentences. And I have always let my students know that that is okay, that everybody performs at a different place. The idea is to just do the best you can at your level. So they're not necessarily any sort of distinction between a student with special needs isn't doing the same thing as everybody else, because they're all working around the same topic. They're just kind of doing it at different levels that are appropriate to them. And that's something that's always written into all of my assignments. It's been an ongoing discourse in my classroom all year long that everybody functions and performs at a different level, and it's okay to perform it at your level. And my students will say it to each other, like they know it. So I have several students with some pretty significant learning disabilities in my classroom, and they're all just encouraged and supported to perform at the level that they best can. And I don't know if that fully answers the question. I know it kind of sounds vague, but I could do a whole nother presentation on this topic.
We've also
And
got a raised hand from Jim.
yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
Jim, you are unmuted in this moment.
Yes, actually, I'm Adriana.
Oh, okay.
I was using the wrong Zoom, but anyway, I had a question. I'm a teacher, and what I've been finding out that I work with other teachers, and we have the same class, so everybody assigns things for the kids, but I think they're feeling overwhelmed because we're not able to, I guess, to talk about what we're giving to the kids, and it ends up being too much, I think, for them.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we go about, maybe doing a better job thinking about next school year?
Right. In my opinion, on a certain level, that should be an administrative discussion and a district discussion. I feel right now that I work in Shangri-La, and that my district has been very supportive of the social emotional well-being of our students. And very early on in distance learning, the district realized that sticking to our usual schedule was too much for students. And so we were mandated, whereas normally I would see my classes 4 times a week, we were mandated to only quote unquote meet with our students twice a week. They designed a modified schedule in which students kind of have a schedule that they follow, but they don't necessarily meet with their classes. And I can only assign work on those days, and the work can't take more than 20 to 30 minutes for students to do. So my A period class, for example, I have on Monday and Thursday. I can only assign something to them then, and I can't make it due until the next time they meet. They also worked into the schedule a full open day on Wednesday. That's called Workshop Wednesday, and that's supposed to be an opportunity for students to catch up on some of their missing work. And also meet with teachers, I'm sorry, for help if they need it. So my district has been very proactive in trying to monitor that. And honestly, Adriana, it's not even just being overwhelming for students, it's also being overwhelming for parents. But I think that's a district level discussion.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So I'm going to, in the interest of time, move on. And I wanted to talk, and maybe I'll try to make this briefer, but about trying to find balance for yourself and staying sane. And so what are some of the things that you can be doing to take care of yourself? We know it is completely unsustainable to be staring at a computer screen all day. It's not healthy for us, it's not good for us, and it's, the recipe for a complete meltdown like I started to have yesterday. So, we hear a lot about how important it is as parents, if you're a parent, to have your kids sticking to a schedule. It's also really important that we stick to a schedule. And so the recommendation is that you start each day kind of noting down what your must-dos are. So if you have to meet with a class at 9 o'clock, that should go on your schedule at 9 o'clock. If you have a staff meeting at 11 o'clock, that has to go on your schedule for 11 o'clock. But you kind of black those things in and then schedule in your flexible items. And so that might be grading student work, responding to emails, but that you schedule in those things that can be more flexible. It's also really important that you set limits on computer time. What are going to be the limits of your day? And then add in self-care. And I literally write self-care activities into my schedule, which I'll show you a picture of in a second. And one of the other recommendations I read was that you should even set alarms on your phone that'll go off and say, okay, it's time for you to get up now, school is closed. This is what my schedule looks like. So I print this out at the beginning of the week. It's my computer calendar, and you'll see that there are these blacked out items like my A period class, my team meeting, my C period class, my D period class. Those are the like non-negotiable kinds of things that I have on my schedule. I had a meeting yesterday with your organization. I have the webinar on here right now that are blacked out. As other things come up, I write them in. I'm participating in a webinar tomorrow for NECTFL. But then you'll notice that I write in my morning walk every day. I also take a walk around midday. My daughter likes me to take her for a drive. So I pencil all of these things in, and I make sure if my walk is scheduled for 12 o'clock, at 12 o'clock, I stop whatever I'm doing and I get up and I go for a walk. And you know, that taking care of your well-being really means stepping away from the computer. It's a great time to cultivate some hobbies, get some exercise, get outside. New York Times had a whole article today about how important it was to get outside. And I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not going to advise whether it's safe or not. I would encourage you to consult your own local authorities, but fresh air is certainly really good. I learned to sew under these times. I was making masks to donate, and on the nicer days, I've been going outside and gardening, but I have to be really purposeful about putting on my schedule that I'm going to stop each day at a certain time, or at least for a period of time, and then maybe come back to it, because it's just very essential. The other little piece I wanted to talk about, and I realize not everybody in this meeting is necessarily also a parent, but I do feel those of us who are parenting students who are learning from home, while we're simultaneously trying to teach from home, have some particularly special demands on us that we need. Yeah, see, there it is right there. I'm sorry, I just saw a kid get a hug in one of the moderators. So really, I think this is very challenging for us. This is my work setup. So the purple computer with the mug next to it is my desk. And I transformed my little craft table into a desk for my daughter. And while I'm working all day, she sits right there and is doing her work. I think for teachers who have kids who are in school, it's really hard to find the balance between when you're going to be the teacher and when you're going to be the parent to your student. And I think we always want to be really respectful of the authority and the knowledge of other teachers, but it's hard being a teacher and knowing good instructional practices when you see a teacher doing something with your child that you might not necessarily agree with. So some of my strategies is my daughter also has a schedule that she follows. She fills it out every day, and we kind of coordinate our schedules each day so that she knows when are the times that she can interrupt me and get help and when she can't. This is a big struggle we had early on, where I would be teaching a class and she would be asking for help with her math homework. So I really had to kind of let her know at 9 o'clock I have a class, so you know, just stop what you're doing at that point if you need any help with it. And we just had to kind of be really purposeful about our schedule. We have to let the teachers teach and let them do their work. My daughter initially was asking for a lot of help, and I finally had to let some of her teachers know that the work that was being asked of her was a little bit too challenging, and for them to provide the help appropriately, because it wasn't really, the level of help she needed with some things wasn't necessarily my place to be doing. And so to let them teach and to trust them that that they know what they're doing in their content area. At the same time, and my friend Leanne said this to me this morning, to trust your intuition. You know your student very well and your child very well. You know what their social emotional well-being is right now. And to just go with your intuition. If you feel that something that's being asked of your child is too much or inappropriate, you just trust your intuition and do what's right. I have to say, we had on my team a discussion with one of our students, you know, who Adriana mentioned some students feeling overwhelmed. The student was feeling very overwhelmed and he wasn't turning in a lot of work in some of his classes. And the teachers reached out and kind of, you know, said to the parents, like, what's going on? He's not turning in this work. And the mother basically said that she was specifying a certain amount of time he had to work every day and then would tell him to go outside and play. And if he hadn't finished all of her work, that was acceptable to her as long as he had put in sincere effort for that specified amount of time. And I think as parents, we need to do that, but also as teachers, we need to trust parents when they make those decisions for their kids and not penalize that child because they didn't turn every assignment in on time. We have to trust that the parents are doing what they know is best for their students. And I think this piece of using your own experiences and what you're watching your children go through at home, we also need to use to then inform our own teaching. And so when I see sometimes maybe my daughter might ask for a teacher to help and the teacher's response isn't necessarily all that helpful, it helps inform me how to communicate better with my own students and families. My daughter, I often struggle with how to provide students with enough direction on an assignment, but to not overwhelm them. And my daughter has a teacher who provides very long, elaborate directions to assignments. And it's because she's putting an amazing effort. She really wants them to be able to do it and know what they need to do. But in my daughter's case, it's overwhelming. And I watch that happen with my daughter, and it helps to inform my own teaching and how I'm providing my students with directions. And so we're back to kind of the final reflection, and it's 5 o'clock, and I know we're running out of time, but maybe people want to just kind of reflect on this last piece of it.
Any comment? So
we did have a share in this last section about how important vitamin D is.
Oh.
Walking daily, getting gardening in.
Yep.
Very important. Lots of empathy for folks who have kids at any age, you know, whether they're under 18 or even in college, you know, just lots of empathy there. Sometimes changing venues can be a really great strategy, you know, even just working outside if you can.
Yes, great.
The importance of giving encouragement both to your students, to yourself, to your family, your loved ones. Setting an alarm is a great way to move on to a different activity. Yes, to reset your clock to do something else. And also just appreciation for these kinds of reminders. Yeah, scheduling your day and making sure to focus on the essentials and making that a daily practice as well.
And, you know, feel free to, I'm happy to continue to hear comments, but I just kind of wanted to make one last statement. And I feel like we've talked today about a lot of important practices, like making activities purposeful and meaningful, ensuring that we are pushing students along the proficiency continuum, being empathetic to students, focusing on feedback, choosing your battles, thinking about ways to differentiate to meet the needs of all learners. These are all good teaching practices. And I think we really need to be focusing on them as we continue through with distance learning. They're important to it, but I think it's really important to find ways to take what we've learned to this and reinvigorate our instructional practices as we move on. I think for me, some of the really powerful pieces of that speak out are the importance of providing students with feedback and really emphasizing feedback over grading. Also, really emphasizing purposeful, communicative tasks that'll push students' proficiency, and really being empathetic to students. If we can be empathetic right now to crises they might be having, or depression, or food insecurity, if we can be empathetic to that now, we need to be empathetic towards those things even when this crisis is over.